Hi folks, Gavin from ChangePlan here, and I'm very excited to have Julie Cockerill. Julie is CEO of Lemon Co. She is an executive leadership coach with over 30 years of experience.
Well, hello.
Julie, am I correct in my observation that the visibility and understanding of neurodivergence has grown over the last few years?
We're definitely seeing a lot more conversation about it. I think that's probably been because there's a lot more diagnosis of women in their midlife, because obviously many years ago it was only thought to be in boys or men. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more conversation around it.
We're specifically really interested at the moment in thinking about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Yeah.
And I know that you're quite an expert on this topic. What is ADHD?
In its simplest form, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. There are three types. So we have the attention deficit part of it, which used to be called ADD, but we don't use that language anymore. We have the hyperactive version of it, and then we have this sort of combination version of it. And look, ADHD is different for everybody, so you get such variation. What we've found in the research is that those areas of the brain affected by ADHD, which is, working memory, prefrontal cortex, the sort of emotional parts of the brain and motor control, tend to be smaller in a brain is ADHD versus a neurotypical brain. And we also know that these ADHD brains don't tend to be as efficient in producing dopamine. So, there's some really interesting differences between an ADHD brain and a neurotypical brain, but actually, you can be as effective, as successful with an ADHD brain as you can with, a neurotypical brain.
What proportion of adults have ADHD?
It's about 1 in 20 Australians have ADHD, and that's about sort of 6 to 7% of adults have ADHD.
Got it. Okay. And I'm interested in whether people actually know that they have ADHD, because I know that a lot of people come to understand that they've got ADHD brains later in life.
So I was diagnosed with ADHD about 4 years ago, and the reason I was diagnosed was because my son was diagnosed. And because ADHD tends to run in families, they haven't been able to prove that there's a genetic link, but it does tend to run in families. And so it is complex. We might have, complex trauma that is causing ADHD type symptoms. You might find that somebody who's going through menopause might have ADHD symptoms, that brain fog, that trouble focusing, the inattentiveness, that more hyperactive. So it's not always straightforward as to the symptoms. What I do note is with myself and coaching clients is there tends to be that there's been a long period of struggle. And with that struggle comes lots of different side effects. Like, I can be a really high performer, but I really struggle to internalize that because my brain has been taught and messages have been provided over years around you're not working hard enough, or you didn't do well enough at school, or you're lazy, or so. This sort of side effect, there's quite a lot of negative side effects when you haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, and then you can't treat it, whether it's medication or non-medication. So it's not always straightforward. Women specifically, they were often misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression, and so they've struggled with that. But actually the underlying issue was ADHD. There's so much complexity in this lack of diagnosis of women specifically.
So interesting. I wasn't aware of the gender divide or disparity there in terms of diagnosis or just general understanding. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, at ChangePlan, we're all about elevating change managers and thinking about organizations. Just thinking about those people who have ADHD or ADHD brains, do they tend to sort of congregate into various areas within organizations?
Yeah, look, I think you could find someone with an ADHD brain in lots of different roles in organizations, but what I've certainly found is, even those people who are doing roles like program manager or project manager, they always have this sort of entrepreneurial kind of bent to them. So the way they do that is probably quite different from somebody who has a very highly analytical brain. You might find ADHD brains in creative people or entrepreneurs or CEOs. There's obviously, I don't know that it's a particularly well-researched stat, but we do talk a lot about ADHD is going into their own businesses because they don't want to be tied down in a corporate cookie cutter kind of role. So I think you can be in lots of different roles, but you'll have a natural style that might be much more creative and passionate and all in, and that's the beauty of the ADHD brain.
Right, I'm hearing creative, passionate, all in, kind of entrepreneurial. As change managers, we're always trying to understand people and to try and understand how they will be affected by changes that are coming up and to try and support them through a change journey. Will understanding of neurodivergences like ADHD help us to create change management activities when we're thinking through stakeholders' different needs?
Look, I think there is absolutely always benefit understanding how brains work. Different brains require different things. So when we're thinking about change, you might need to spend a lot more time the co-creating phase if you've been in an organisation that's had a lot of change. And I always think, and certainly in my experience, is that when I've gone into an organisation and working on transformation, where there's been a lot of change that's been poorly handled in the past, there's a lot more resistance, there's a lot more negativity, and so you've got to spend a lot of that time up front really engaging with people differently. And I think that's no different for a blend of brains as well. So you need to consider, how do I communicate with lots of different types of brains and requirements? You might need a higher level of detail when you're talking to somebody that is ASD, but you want to simplify and get really direct. What we're seeing is that there is, 1 in 3 people with ASD also have ADHD. So you've got that kind of blend as well. There's a lot of comorbidity, which basically means ADHD is not the gift in itself. There's other things that can come with it, like depression and anxiety and OCD. So these are all things that you need to be aware of, but if you're really thinking about how do I work with the brain specifically, then should be able to cater for the different styles. What will then obviously be really important is how we engage managers and how they then personalize that change for the particular audience or brain in their team.
Now, I have a suspicion, and it's based on completely anecdotal evidence, but my suspicion is that those people with certain neurodivergences, like ADHD, might be, on average, more likely to resist change than neurotypical brains. And I recognize that personality is probably a bigger factor in this than neurodivergences. But that aside, would that be fair to say?
My answer is going to be, it depends. It's never as straightforward as that. And so someone who has an ADHD brain has been part of the change process and they've been involved in the co-creation. Like any neurotypical brain, they're going to be more likely to be open to the change. And they also will be more likely to get that sort of dopamine, that because we're very much an interest-based nervous system. So we want to be interested and engaged, and that's obviously where we love that really big rush of dopamine. If you are forcing change on people, especially somebody with ADHD, what you'll generally find is you're going to get resistance. Because what's in it for them? Why should I change? Is this job going to be better for me? Am I going to be happier? Am I going to get more reward, etc.? So it's always depends.
But I mean, to be cheeky, it sounds like just in the context of change that is coming from the top down and pushed onto different groups of people, it's quite possible that brains that are neurodivergent, particularly with ADHD, might be more resistant than neurotypical brains.
They might. But look, you know what? In my experience, that resistance is just information. And when you've had a chance to be engaged and talk about why you're feeling that way, are more likely to be more open. The challenge also comes when you've got to consider the size of change. Like, how much change do I need to be involved with? Because you've also got challenges with working memory. So if I'm really competent in the job now and it's easy for me, as an ADHDer, that's less impact on my brain. That means I haven't got the level of overwhelm and I've got capacity to do things that are perhaps more creative or are new. If the change is massive, then I don't have as much of that working memory that I can rely on. And then there's probably a bit more overwhelm there. I think short and sharp is really good. Long bits of information, sitting in meetings with a lot of information, not being engaged, you will lose an ADHD brain. You know, we'll be looking out the window, thinking about anything else. So if you want to have impact, then you've got to use a variety of communication types. They need to be short and sharp, and they need to, be sort of jargon-less, because we love good jargon in the corporate world, don't we? We love it. Just love that. And I think there also needs to be a way for, someone with an ADHD brain to have conversation and ask questions. So if you're someone that is has an ADHD brain, perhaps spending a lot of time masking at work, so hasn't been very open about the fact that isn't open about the fact that they have an ADHD brain, then they might be reluctant to ask broader setting. And so there needs to be other avenues for them to less threatened in asking questions.
Super helpful, thank you. Does the same thing go for approaches to training?
Oh gosh, absolutely. So, from my own experience when I'm doing training, if you're putting me in a classroom and teaching me how to do stuff where I'm not doing it hands-on, forget it. It's not going to work. And then what I need is short videos where I can watch a little bit and then implement it. Watch a little bit, implement it. There's a kind of resurgence around things like gamification, which is fantastic for brain training. Also, just more hands-on play is really great for ADHD brains because you're going to get that boost of dopamine, which is really good for working memory as well.
Thinking about the journey that change managers themselves have and those people who are change practitioners, do you have any tips for those people who are working in change that themselves have ADHD? Any comments on how they might be best equipped to contribute to delivery of change?
Things that I've seen work really well is that, you've got a toolkit that has lots of templates, so you don't have to spend time formatting stuff. So that's a big win. The other thing is that we need space for creativity and ideation. If you're forcing an ADHD brain to use cookie cutter approach, just do this, just do that, then do that, you will not get the best from an ADHD brain. You want that sort of expansive thinking. You want to be able to play to their strengths. And so, that comes when you've got freedom to think, to challenge, to collaborate. That is what an ADHD brain is so good at. So we need structure because we hate structure, but we need structure. And that comes in that sort of more templated. But then there needs to be some of this room for novelty and experimentation and ideation.
Interesting. I love everything you said. Julie, it's been so interesting. I know it's such an important topic out there, and I know that change managers, being such people-focused people, are always trying to support all people throughout organizations. And of course, just focusing on this one particular area has been really helpful. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been fantastic. Love talking about this.
How can people reach you if they want to chat more?
Oh, look, LinkedIn is always good. If they want to, they can email me on my email, julie@lemon-co.com.au. That's amazing.
Great. Thanks very much.